Hello everybody, Jordan here. So we're continuing our Forgotten Realms history and diving in. We left off at the Dawn War. Now the Dawn War takes place during the Blue Age, and at this point Abeir-Toril was a large blue planet. I'm assuming it's covered in water because that's why they called it the Blue Planet. And the Dawn War began with some fighting between the Primordials and the gods over who gets to rule over Abeir-Toril. Now, in order to talk about the Dawn War, we need to talk about the mad god Tharizdun. Now, Tharizdun was a deity who was hungry for power, and he wanted to basically create a little pocket of his own where he could rule and just be freaking awesome. In order to do this, he found a shard of pure evil. Now, this shard was planted to him by the Oberiths. And this is where another reason I'm confused is because, again, Lord Ao creates the universe, but these creatures, these Oberiths, which are more or less ancient demons that predated the gods, they just kind of lived in the darkness and the void, and they came wandering out, and they're like, you know what? These gods are trying to build something. We're gonna smash it down. Nearest I can tell, they're just evil, and that's what they want to do. So they have this shard of pure evil, and they leave it for Tharizdun to find. Now, when Tharizdun is using this shard, or he picks it up, it starts corrupting him, and it drives him to madness, and this is why he's known as the Mad God. Now, the Oberiths wanted Tharizdun to take this shard of evil and plant it in the Astral Sea, and they promised that he would have complete dominion over the Astral Sea, which is what he wanted. Now, Tharizdun, although mad, recognized that this plan was just not going to work. The gods were too strong, he was not going to be able to slip in there. He's like, this is just not going to happen. So instead, I'm going to travel to the farthest reaches of the cosmos, and I'm going to plant the seed of evil in some primordial expanse in the elemental chaos. Now, his hope was after doing that, he'd be able to seize that area as his own. So this shard of evil, this seed, it grew into the abyss, and it changed the primordials there into the demons that inhabit the abyss. Now, the gods were fighting with the primordials at this time, and they kind of put that down on hold to deal with Tharizdun and this new, weird, evil, demonic problem. So they took him, and they imprisoned him in another universe known as the Void Harrow. And they left him there with all of his powers intact, but unfortunately he's a little too crazy, and so his insanity prevents him from plotting an escape. But there's all kinds of various cults that still worship him, so it's a good plot device. Basically, we're going to take Tharizdun, the Mad God, we're going to give him this backstory, and now I can have a bunch of crazy cults for you to play with in Dungeons & Dragons. Boom. Now, after Tharizdun was imprisoned, the Primordials were led by this demon known as Miska the Wolf Spider. And I'm kind of confused by that. I think that it's either the Abyssal Demons or the Oberiths. They were being led by Miska the Wolf Spider. And whether he's an Abyssal Demon or an Oberith, I'm not entirely sure. But I'm leaning more towards Abyssal. So now, there's this Abyssal Demon threat. And there's also the Primordial versus Gods threat. One of the most violent battles of the war, the dragon god Io, decided to face alone a giant primordial known as the King of Terror. Now, the King of Terror took his adamantian axe and cleaved Io in two. He just cut him straight down in half during their conflict. Now, the two halves of Io actually formed these new dragons instantaneously, and that's where we get Bahamut and Tiamat. Now, those two dragons joined forces and killed the King of Terror, but this marked the only time that they've ever worked as one, because one's good and one's evil, so they decided to hate each other after that. Now, the Dawn War keeps going until we have a primordial known as Dendar the Night Serpent, and he flew up and devoured the sun. Now, devouring the sun means that there's no more heat, so the entire planet iced over, and all of the life that was there soon died. An Oberith, known as the Queen of Chaos, allied herself with Miska the Wolf Spider, which again makes me think that Miska is is an abyssal demon. Miska the Wolf Spider gave his allegiance to the Queen of Chaos to aid in destroying all of the gods. Now, there was a huge battle, but these creatures called the Wind Dukes of Akka, who are a group of ancient beings that resided on the plane of air, they defeated Miska at the Battle of Pesh. Which shattered these armies of chaos, and the Queen of Chaos retreated with her armies back into the abyss. So early D&D and Forgotten Realms has a lot of there's good and bad, but there's also law and chaos. So a lot of these creatures are like, I'm evil or I'm strictly chaotic. And I think the Wind Dukes were a very lawful good. And obviously the Queen of Chaos is very evil and chaotic. So that's partially like where their clash happened. And that might have been why they were fighting on the plane of air at that time. Now the gods eventually won the war because the primordial Ubteo betrayed his fellow primordials. He aided the gods in imprisoning many of his former allies, and then he made an agreement with the gods that he would guard the lair of Dendar the Night Serpent should Dendar ever return and destroy Toril. And as reward, the gods granted him sole control over this peninsula, this island called Chult. And it's an area in southwestern Faerun, and it's changed a lot, but it's kind of the land before time of the Forgotten Realms. It's full of dinosaurs and lots of like tribal societies and stuff. Again, it was a way for them to say, if you want this kind of adventure, we have that in the Forgotten Realms on here. Come explore the jungles of Chult. It sounds kind of like like come see beautiful Boston. You know, the jungles of Chult. I hear they're great this time of year. That ended the Dawn War, and the era after this became known as the Days of Thunder. And that's where we'll leave off today. Thank you for listening to our ramble as we both slowly figure out the history of the Forgotten Realms. I'm enjoying putting this together, and I hope you are having fun figuring this out with me. As always, I'm Jordan, the PH is silent, and thanks for watching. Tharisden.